If you enjoyed what I had to say about Dark Souls, you might have gotten the impression that I really like hardcore games or super difficult games or something like that. But that's not really true. What I enjoy are fairly crafted and challenging games, and there are actually some great talking points in the Fallout 4 patch that dropped just before Dark Souls 3 was released. I'm sure it did a bunch of other stuff too, but the most important thing it did for me was it added survival mode, where you have to sleep, eat, and drink water. I really like that kind of experience when it's done right. Survival sims are a thrill to me. There's something so methodical about starting with nothing and building your way up to competent survival. But the unfortunate truth is that for every survival kids out there, there's a Lost in Blue. And if the New Vegas survival mode was survival kids, then Fallout 4 is Lost in Blue. Now what do I mean by that? Okay, Survival Kids was a really simple survival sim for the Game Boy Color. It didn't take itself very seriously, the tutorial being the player trying to get a pocket knife from a monkey. Survival was the challenge, of course, but it never became a slog to do things. The game had an air of exploration that was accented well by the survival. On the other hand, Lost in Blue was an absolute nightmare to play. This game was significantly harder than actually surviving on a similar island. You never really got a handle on your situation. You'd always find yourself lacking and unable to travel very far. Well, until you could find pineapples, then the game just became too easy. Did you see the flaw there? Entirely too hard and never getting a handle on the things you need, until suddenly you hit a tipping off point and it becomes too easy. That's survival mode on Fallout 4 to the T. The game starts out unbelievably hard, the player character dying to ghouls and raiders early on, until you hit the Brotherhood of Steel, at which point the survival aspects almost become trivial, and you regain the ability to fast travel. Water becomes abundant, and you gain access to the best armors in the game. Like, it's such a confusing subject for me, because I've loved the Fallout series ever since the first one, and my first complaint about Fallout 3 and onward was how easy it was. The old games took a lot of strategy and thought, even just in building your character. Every single stat felt vital and important. Picking the right skills wildly changed how you played the game and how quickly you could take off. You learned important parts of the world and the fastest ways to travel to them. While there wasn't a food or water meter, you grabbed food and stim packs like they were made of diamondium, because going into a battle unprepared, even a little, could easily lead to your death, even into the endgame. Speech also served a much more important dynamic, to avoid confrontation as much as possible, because any fight could kill you. That's just not the case with Fallout 3 and New Vegas. It's a lot more like the Elder Scrolls games, where I can just run up to gigantic bad guys and hammer them with attacks until they die. And the only effective counter the game seems to have to combat that is to make enemies that can kill you in one shot regardless of any armor or mitigation. The problem with introducing very hard combat into the new Fallout games is that the primary form of engagement in a Fallout game comes from the intrigue, not the combat. Your action is exploring the world, meeting people, and getting lost in the space. At least with the new Fallouts. See, the old Fallouts were really more about the quest than the exploration. I mean, there was a tiny element of exploration, but the whole thing felt much more linear and 1,000 times more focused. It ends up not being a very fair comparison. But hard combat was better in the first two Fallout games because the action of the game was based in the combat. Not quite the case when we get to Fallout 4. I mean, even the presentation of the game, it's not built to send you on a quest. The game is built to let you explore and to build things. It's poking into the Minecraft part of your brain, not the fighting part. So when Fallout 4 says that it's going to have survival mode, immediately I think that the game just isn't tooled to play like that. To be fair though, let's go through a few things that actually make Fallout 4's survival mode interesting. The biggest thing is that it changes the way you look at the game. In survival mode, you can only save by sleeping, and pretty much any enemy is capable of killing you until you hit that tipping point. So you always have to be careful in any situation. You can't just murder hobo caravans anymore. The guards will shoot you dead in seconds. You can't run willy-nilly into bases and blow up the place walking out with all the loot. You have to look at the place, scout a little, maybe pick off the lone guards, maybe sneak in. It makes speech viable again, much like the first two Fallouts. You want to have successful speech encounters just to avoid combat. I also really like that meds reduce your water and the necessity of eating almost certainly increases your radiation, making a fun kind of balancing act. Moving into the middling, we could call this a double-edged sword, but melee becomes totally unviable. But really, in a universe with guns presented in a somewhat realistic fashion, that's mostly okay for me. Because most of the time that means melee enemies are only dangerous in giant numbers. On the completely bad side though, the whole experience becomes quite tedious after a bit. Keeping your water up is a slog, and coming from a guy that spent a year in Iraq, I happen to know it doesn't take this much sleep and water to operate competently in a 5-hour period. I know it's a game, but it bills itself on being more realistic. The constant unfair death is pretty annoying also. You can do everything right and get caught with a stray lucky bullet and die. Now that's actually incredibly realistic, but not in a really good way. I feel like the game needs to punish mistakes, not just randomly lash out at the player. To me, what it feels like is that Fallout, or at least Fallout as it is now, is just not built to be a hardcore survival experience. Maybe if they toned down the consumption of food and water just a little bit, and toned down the damage just a little bit while keeping the balancing act of meds, food, water, and sleep, I think the whole experience would be a lot better. I can't fault the game for unfair deaths too much. It's so open that they don't have time to meticulously craft every encounter. It'd be nigh impossible. Anyway, those are my brief thoughts on the new survival mode for Fallout 4. I'm making my way through it. I'm enjoying it quite a bit. I haven't tried the new DLC though. Let me know what you guys think. What's a good survival sim? Anything here I should do to improve? Let me know. But enjoy some water on my behalf until next time.